There are two classic mechanics in RPGs for handling armor, and one is more realistic than the other. By the way, it's totally a deliberate choice to combine traditional large ring mild steel maille with modern small ring stainless steel maille. Has nothing to do with the fact that these are the only two wearable pieces of armor I have right now. I'm making a point here. Some kind of point. Also, don't forget that wearing a maille coif by itself without a helmet is going to give you a whole lot more than aspirin can fix. Anyway, so what are the two versions in which armor usually works in role-playing games? One is increasing the defense rating, so it makes it less likely for an attack against you to succeed. It may just be completely ineffective. The other version is an armor absorption rating. So basically, first you determine whether or not you're being hit, and you subtract the armor rating from that damage. That's the more realistic one. I've done a lot of armor tests over the years, more than a decade really, on different materials with different weapons, different setups, etc. And when I take all that together to draw a conclusion, then yes, armor absorption makes more sense, because even when an attack penetrates the armor, which happens quite frequently with thrusts, unless it's plate armor, of course, thrusts will easily go through a gambeson, a leather armor, even maille to an extent, depending on what it is, how large the rings are, what material it is, and so on and so forth. So when that happens, you would think, okay, the armor has failed, you're being hit, full damage. But no, that's not how it works. It does absolutely reduce the amount of damage taken. In fact, depending on the type of blade and how sharp or dull the edge is, even something as simple as clothing can make a difference, to the point where it becomes a little bit misleading. Sometimes, depending on the test setup, just one even fairly thin layer of clothing will completely negate a cut with a blade. But then when you take that off, it will absolutely tear into the ballistic gel or whatever medium you have. Reality is awfully complex and tricky, and in fact that's one of the nice things about games. They simplify things a little bit, and you would not want that much complexity in your system. It just gets overly complicated and not very fun. Sometimes a system distinguishes between different damage types, like typically slashing, piercing, and blunt, which makes a lot of sense. That is more realistic. It just makes everything a little trickier. And then on top of that, you have considerations like hit location matters quite a bit. If you get hit in the head while wearing maille, you're screwed. Straight up. Yes, there's damage mitigation in the sense that it won't cleave into your head, but the resulting damage will absolutely fracture the skull beneath, and hits to bones, like collarbones or rib cage, are also way worse. Whereas taking a hit in the abdomen, even if you're not a chonker, is not as dangerous. And particularly if you do have some padding, it's much better if you have flexible armor on top. It's not going to hit you as hard. So that makes quite a substantial difference. But again, you would not want to have that in a role-playing system. It's just too much. Now, if you wanted to be even more realistic about it, the armor would basically have its own health, and the damage would be divided between the armor and the wearer. Because, of course, armor takes damage. Even plate armor will be dented from certain hits with certain weapons and enough force. It takes a whole lot more than other types of armor, but it'll still happen. And of course, some RPGs do just that by giving the armor durability. And we all know how annoying it is to have to constantly run back to town to get it repaired, right? This is not quality of life. The other model, where armor increases the defense rating in an all or nothing kind of scenario, doesn't really apply to anything outside of extreme cases, like say a narrow-bladed rapier trying to cut plate armor. That's not going to do anything. It's not even going to damage the armor in any meaningful way. In reality, anything is better than nothing, and it will always reduce the amount of damage taken. And sometimes it doesn't matter substantially, like for example the case of a maille coif without a rigid helmet. Yeah, again, it's less gruesome, shall we say. The head is not going to be split in two, but the fractures are going to be so bad and the brain damage is going to be so severe that that's it, really. So in some cases, the difference would be between dead and hella dead. And sometimes a particular type of armor is weak against a certain form of damage, like maille and blunt impact. If you get hit by a mace or an axe or something else that generates a whole lot of impact force, then this does very little. It's still better than nothing, but not really substantially to prevent bones from being broken, things like that. But overall, any armor will make a difference, even if you have relatively thin leather, or say padded armor like a gambeson that's thinner than it should be. It seems that I tied the microphone to the maille, but clearly that wasn't a good idea. I'm just going to hold it. I'm not doing anything with the hand anyway. So in some cases, even though the blade gets through the armor, and it seems like in this all or nothing scenario, you receive full damage, you really don't. When you compare that armor or clothing or padding or what have you to nothing, the naked scenario is a whole heck of a lot worse. How much worse? Well, I'm also working on a video about cutting power that'll put things into perspective and also illustrate why tatami cutting can be a little misleading. Again, depending on the circumstances, this might be a distinction without a difference. Once someone is terminated, does it really matter if they're pulverized or succumb to internal bleeding? Not really, but still, the armor will limit the amount of damage going through. You might still get stabbed, but not as deeply, and when it comes to hitting or missing vital organs, a couple of centimeters can make the difference between success and failure. Just ask your imaginary girlfriend about that. Although it does indeed matter how you use it. There are certain ways of angling a strike and digging in more with the point of the blade that does a whole lot more damage to the armor, but then less to the wearer underneath because it doesn't go as deep. Don't some RPG systems have special attacks that lower the armor rating? That would be such a case. Either way, the situation in which the armor does absorb some damage but isn't enough to save the wearer, that can of course still happen in a role-playing system with that kind of armor absorption damage reduction system. Because if there's just too much damage coming in, then, well, it's not going to help. So, yeah, it makes more sense than you might think. Or maybe you thought this all along, who knows? Either way, thanks for watching, hope you found this interesting, and stay safe. And try not to get hit in the head, even with armor, that's no fun.